All right, everyone, welcome in on a Monday night at 6 o'clock Eastern Time. We apologize for the delay, a number of technical difficulties, echoes, and such things that we would not want you to have to listen to for an hour, but we do want you to listen to Notre Dame football talk for an hour. That's why I invite these gentlemen in. We got Nathan Erbach at the top there from Slap the Sign. We got Mason Plummer also from the fine platform of Slap the Sign, and John Kennedy. He's merely from Always Irish. How are you guys doing tonight?
Doing good. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Good to have you guys on. Understand that you had a big junior day in regards to getting some of the top recruits in the nation and targets for Brian Kelly and company in over the weekend. John, we can start with you in regards to your thoughts about some of the boys that saw campus.
I'm excited because I feel like they are starting to target kind of a different cut of kid, and that's excited to me. But with some of these junior days, I think Mason and Nathan are more into this than I am. And the only reason is it's great, and I love having these guys on campus, but the recruiting thing at Notre Dame's burned me so much. Sometimes some of these, it's like, okay, show me this list of guys. How seriously should I take it? And I know Nathan and Mason don't like that coming from me, but that's how I look at it sometimes. So I'm going to defer to those two on their excitement level about these individual guys. And I think they honestly do spend more time attacking this aspect than I do.
So, but John, basically what you're telling me is that you prepare for the NFL draft and National Signing Day similar to me. I'm like, I don't want to hear anything until the guys are drafted or signed on the dotted line. I don't want to hear all the speculation, the rumors. I don't want to have to think that so-and-so might get drafted by 8 different teams. Just let me know who drafted him. I watch draft night. I don't want to hear anything before that.
Yeah, I think I'm older than these guys. I think I've just been through more fires, and sometimes I'm just like, okay, that's great, all these guys. And if they're juniors, they got a whole other year. So sometimes my optimism with junior day type stuff is a little more subdued. And so Nathan and Mason, feel free to make me feel way more excited about it.
And I'm also older than you, John. So that's a bit of a reminder there. You're the middleman there. It also reminds me to let you know that we could have invited you in like 10 or 15 minutes late because these guys are going to take over now. We'll let them go. Ethan, we'll start with you, and you guys just go back and forth in regards to your thoughts about junior day and some of the top prospects that Notre Dame and Brian Kelly are looking at right now.
Yeah, I mean, they got one commitment during the junior day from a 2021 safety from Illinois. His name's Justin Walters. I think currently he's a 3-star guy, but a lot of people think he's closer to that 4-star range. But he was a top target for him. So, I mean, whether or not the offer list shows, a crazy amount right now, and same with the star rating, he was a top target for the staff for a while. So they were really happy to land him. But it was kind of a weird junior day. Usually, and Mason can probably back me up on this, usually junior day means like juniors going into their senior year for the most part. Right. And this one specifically was a lot of sophomores going into their junior seasons. Besides a couple of commits they already had, Walters who committed, and then a DN from Texas. I'll probably butcher the last name, but it's I think it's David Abiria, who a lot of people thought was going to commit to Notre Dame this past Friday, and then it looks like he might have had a little bit of a change of heart in the sense of just slowing down the process a bit, but he has a lot of big-time offers right now as well, and I think Notre Dame likely leads for him, or at least is in that top group. So all in all, it was a really good junior day, but it was a lot of kids that are maybe a little bit farther into the future, like 2022, and I think they might even have had a couple of 2023 kids on campus as well.
Yeah, overall, it was a lot just projecting for the future. Abiar was a guy that looked likely to go to Oklahoma. Now it's looking like Notre Dame. Abiar is a stud. He's got the measurables that Mike Elston and co. what they want on their defensive line. Some other guys that stand out to me: Cole Bishop, the safety from Georgia. Just some guys off the top of my head. Let me see here. Benjamin Perry, a Mount Carmel 3-star safety from Chicago area. Braylon Allen, I'm not sure if Notre Dame has the best chance with him. I think he might go elsewhere, but he's rated as the number 76 player in America right now. And then Caden Saunders, Nathan. I know you want to talk about Caden Saunders.
You don't want to talk about him.
Yeah, no, he was. I think he was at some 24/7 camp this past weekend and supposedly ran a 4.4. He's a 2022 prospect, so I mean, a kid going from sophomore to junior year already running, whether or not it's officially a 4.4 or not. I mean, that's pretty impressive. And Notre Dame is right in that top group with him, with Penn State at the moment. It looks like, so if they can land someone like that already has, that top level speed before they're even a junior in high school, that'd be a really nice get for them. So I mean, he was definitely one of the top guys in attendance.
I hate to remind you guys that you took the 0 for 2 against UGA, and the Bulldogs chiming in with our friend Fromm's middle finger. I've asked him at times, can he enlighten me on what exactly he's trying to communicate there? But maybe that's directly at Justin Fields or Kirby Smart. I don't know where that's headed, but maybe some of the Georgia fan base after some criticism. But he's off to the NFL. Is Notre Dame back? I always need the interpretation or the definition of, are they back?
Right.
You merely went to the college football playoff 2 years ago. I don't know that you need to be back.
I don't know what back means either. I mean, I think they're still pretty relevant, so people talk about them enough.
I think to be back, to me, means you got to win one of these big games. Not just get there, but to me, you're back when you start winning a couple of these big games. So, yeah, relevant, and yeah, ran the table and went to, the playoff. But to me, Notre Dame's not back until they at least win one of these huge marquee matchups. Then I think we can have that conversation. But I'm not saying they're back till they get over that hump. That's just me. I got kind of a high standard, but that's just my version of back.
John, when is the last time Notre Dame won a big game?
To me, the last time they won a game they were not supposed to win was 2012 at Oklahoma. Now, they won a bunch of other games that were big in the moment or big for Notre Dame versus who they were playing. But if you want to talk about winning a game they weren't supposed to win, I go all the way back to at Oklahoma in 2012. Can you guys think of another one?
That's the one that comes to mind. There's some give and takes, Michigan here and there. There's some close spreads, but not a game that to the magnitude of Oklahoma now.
I actually just going back this week, reviewing. I'm going to release a series in which I'm looking at the preseason AP rankings for the power teams. Start with the big boys. So Notre Dame's going to be one of the first ones released to see who's been generally overrated and underrated in regards to comparing the preseason AP rank over the last decade versus the postseason AP rank. And of course, that 2012 Notre Dame team that went all the way as an undefeated team to the national championship game was not ranked preseason. So pretty underrated, that particular campaign. Because
I think
you guys come to mind and people throw you out there anytime the term overrated is used. I get like, bam, all sorts of Notre Dame comments. Notre Dame's overrated.
But that's only after we embarrass ourselves in the big game that we had to win enough to get that ranking, right? Like, it's cause and effect. So you're not going to hear they're overrated when they're 11-0 or undefeated. You hear that when they get to a certain point and then fail spectacularly on the big stage with everybody watching, or when they land in the playoff and they're not in a conference. We're not going to go down that path this week, but then you hear it. So I don't think it's as it's ongoing, but it's always after the fact something bad happens and it's like, oh, well, look at Notre Dame. They're overrated. So I think that's cause and effect more than it is up front.
Were you guys satisfied with the performance against Georgia, considering what Georgia was considered to be at the point? And they still finished top 5 in the nation. So even though for them, they had a disappointing season because they were expected to make the playoff and compete for a national championship, win the SEC, etc. At that point, obviously going to Georgia, having to play in that kind of environment, playing within one score. And from what I remember of watching every play of that game, I came away thinking, yeah, Georgia's, I don't think decidedly, I think that's too much of a stretch. They were slightly the better team, but it was very competitive in Notre Dame, or I would say Notre Dame probably won the fourth quarter, but couldn't quite, win that with the final drive. Were you, of course, you don't like the loss, but were you somewhat satisfied with the performance against that type of opponent?
I guess it just depends on if you're somebody that likes moral victories or actual victories. I see it on both sides. I see a good performance that, you can kind of be proud of, I guess, but you still didn't get it done. Given Notre Dame played essentially without a running back, and Ian Book was horrible for a good portion of the game. But having Cole Kmet in that game was big. Like I said, it just depends on if we played good in the fourth quarter, so it's something to build on, or do you want to win the whole thing? So I'll leave it to you guys.
What do you think, Nathan?
No, I mean, I think it's just, kind of go back to what Mason said. I mean, moral victories versus actual victories. It was a respectable performance, don't get me wrong, but like John always says, eventually you got to win more of those. And right now they're not winning enough of those games. And I think John would argue they're not winning any of those games. But yeah, no, I mean, at the point in time, I was like, okay, are they going to get blown out against Michigan because of this kind of performance? No, I didn't. I think all three of us thought that they were probably going to beat Michigan regardless if it was home or away. But no, I mean, at the time, I was at least somewhat excited about what they might be able to produce the rest of the season.
Yeah, I agree to the extent that when it happened, you had a chance to go into a raucous environment, night game, game of the week, top 5 opponent on the road. That's the stage Notre Dame has not been performing well on. It was a close game. It showed that you weren't getting out physicaled, up front and getting ran all over. So that's encouraging. But at the end of the day, at what point here are we sick handing out participation ribbons for not getting blown out or being close? Win a damn big game sometime. And the other issue is, over the course of the year, I started to feel a little less good about that game. The more I saw that Georgia seemed to be more vulnerable than most people thought. And so that kind of, as the year went on and you saw that, I started to maybe think a little less of it. And then when the Michigan debacle happened, take your little moral victory there. And then all the good vibes from that were gone once Michigan hit. So maybe that's not fair. I'm taking something that happened later. But once you added that into it, it's like, okay, well, now your top 2 games of the year, what happened? One was a moral victory and one was a humiliation. And so my feelings I changed as the year went on.
That Michigan game shocked me. I would normally have watched every minute, every play of that game, but I was on the road and taking some time off and so forth. So that was kind of a watch it in the aftermath, but I already know what the score is kind of deal. And I was shocked when I saw that score. I picked Notre Dame to win. I thought Michigan, man, they gotta be demoralized after blowing a game against Penn State in which they came all the way back from 21 down and dropped a touchdown pass that would have tied the game in the end zone. And they're out of it now that they've lost 2 games and they can't recover from a national championship perspective. It's not a Big Ten game, so there's no. I just thought that, man, Notre Dame's playing well, and this is going to be Notre Dame's game. And then you see the rest of the season play out, and you're thinking these teams are almost dead even. But on that given night, boy, it was ugly.
I have no comment on Michigan.
I don't either, but I guess that's why you
Right
play
ahead.
the games. It happens. Michigan's been smacked around by Notre Dame as well. It tends to happen. So I don't take anything huge from it. I think it was a bad night for Notre Dame and a great night for Michigan, and not much more than that. So.
Yeah, I think if they play 10 times, or those two particular teams from 2019 play 10 times, it's a toss-up. I think the rest of the season shows us that. Talking about potential big games for John and everybody else, let's look at the 2020 schedule. After we answer this question from Doug, so I may be banned from hosting the show going forward after I admit to this. I've never seen Rudy.
I hate Rudy.
How good is the movie?
I'm not a typical Notre Dame fan. I hate Rudy.
Hate it.
Yeah, I'm not a Rudy fan at all. I'm not really a big fan of his as a person, personally, and I hated the movie.
Okay, so I know multiple Rudigers personally, and so my perspective on this is probably going to be a little bit tainted just because of my personal friendships and knowledge with a lot of the Rudiger clan. And so I have mixed feelings on it. It's not my favorite movie ever, but every once in a while, if I'm in a romantic Notre Dame mood, I'll fire it up. And here's the other thing. A lot of people will say, everybody should love Rudy. It's the story of achieving your dreams, blah, blah, blah. If I did not like Notre Dame, I would never watch this movie. And if I did, I would absolutely hate it. There's plenty of movies about overcoming obstacles and reaching your dreams. I'm not going to watch one that highlights a team I hate. So
Yeah.
For any non-Notre Dame fans, I would hate it. I wouldn't even watch it. I don't want to watch a movie. The whole point is how special it is to play somewhere I hate. I would never watch it if I wasn't a Notre Dame fan. Never.
Yeah, for me, growing up in South Bend, I think it was surreal being young, watching the movie. You know, I've been to Notre Dame so many times as a kid and seeing shots from I've been there, you know what I mean? Like on the field and stuff like that. It was super cool to see. So maybe I have a slightly bias towards it. I think it's okay. It's not my favorite movie ever, but I enjoy it.
All right, there we've got the take on Rudy. There you go, Doug. Hopefully you're happy with that. You got the hate and the love and the sentimental moments from John at times. I don't know if those come after those big game losses or not. Maybe in the middle of the summer sometime. I don't know. So I'm looking at some potential big games on the 2020 schedule. Obviously, when you're Notre Dame or you're a team of that ilk, anytime you lose a game, it suddenly becomes a big game. Arkansas is not a big game. Navy's not a big game unless you would lose the game. Then suddenly that was a big game. You lost it. What looked like big games at this point, of course, you always play Stanford. You get a lot of the ACC with the 5-game contract. Navy, of course, is a tradition-rich game. USC, of course. Clemson just completely jumps off the page, as well as Lambeau Field and Wisconsin to a lesser degree. Let's start from the top with Navy, and I'll let you boys mix it up. We'll lead with John in regards to what stands out about the 2020 schedule, which, again, starts off with an August 29th date in Dublin. That would be in Ireland, not Ohio, against Navy, a team that Notre Dame typically beats up on, a team that finished in the top 25 this past season. And Notre Dame annihilated Navy. I believe the score was at 49-7 at one point in that game and finished like 56-21. So what stands out to you, John?
So I like the idea of getting Navy out of the way first. I never really loved playing Navy, kind of for the reason you said. I feel like Notre Dame playing Navy is a lose-lose situation. If they beat them and beat them bad, it doesn't matter how good Navy is. It's, well, you should do that because they're a military academy. And then if you get beat by them, then you're ridiculed into the next century. So in that regard, playing Navy, I've always not really enjoyed it. So I like the idea you're going to do it first right away. You have time to prep for it, get that done. And so I don't expect them to really probably be tested until week 5 at Lambeau Field against Wisconsin. I just don't see Arkansas, Western Michigan, Wake. So I think that obviously we're all circling Lambeau Field. Then you have Stanford, who's a little down. You know what? Pittsburgh could be a tricky one. Pitt always seems to catch somebody that's looking down the road.
2 years ago at your
Yeah.
place.
And so Pitt is always that tricky one because you're like, oh, it's Pitt, whatever. And then they'll sneak up on you. And then obviously Clemson. And then later in the year, Louisville surprised me last year. We caught them early week 1. The improvements they made throughout last year. I think Louisville's another one that's not going to be as easy as you think just looking at the name Louisville. And then I expect a dogfight out in LA on Thanksgiving weekend. USC is going to have some issues roster-wise the next couple years, but they still got all that offensive talent, and I'm nervous about that game out there. Notre Dame's now in a situation where, whether it's fair or not, we're circling these 2 biggest games. That's the focus because people are getting sick of going 10-2, losing your 2 big ones, or getting into a big game and not performing. So for me, I don't want to say it's a 2-game season. A lot of people are circling Lambeau Field and then November 7th with Clemson.
Not a 3-game season with USC.
Yeah, I think it is what it is. You can make fun of them all you want. I'm expecting a dogfight out there. They're going to put up a lot of points again.
What do you guys think of the schedule here?
Kind of echoing what John said, I do like that they have Navy first and then they get the bye week afterwards. Just kind of getting them out of the way. I mean, a lot of the times they play them halfway through the year and then a guy gets hurt because the chop blocks, whatever you want to call them. And most Notre Dame fans honestly just hate playing Navy. We respect the hell out of them, but it's just one of those games where you don't really look forward to on the schedule. Arkansas, I mean, they added Felipe Franks from Florida. It should help them at quarterback. But I mean, again, like you guys say, if you lose to Arkansas, especially at home, then, what are we really doing here? Western Michigan, same thing, obviously. Wake Forest, I mean, they lose Jamie Newman to Georgia. I think Sam Hartman's a pretty good quarterback in his own right. That's always, I wouldn't say it's always a tricky game for Notre Dame, but there have been a few instances where they've played them here in the last, 5-6 years where at least it's been entertaining. And then obviously Wisconsin at Lambeau Field. I personally think Wisconsin is going to be down this year unless Graham Mertz turns into a superstar quarterback and he's the guy from the get-go. That would be the main worry there. And I'm kind of still on that with Stanford as well. I mean, I do like David Mills at quarterback for Stanford, but their recruiting has sort of gone downhill the last few years, and they don't land big classes, and then lately they haven't really been landing a lot of great players either. So I'm not too worried about Stanford, especially with that one being at home. At Pitt, echoing John again, Pitt, for whatever reason, always seems to give Notre Dame a scare. Pat Narduzzi was at Michigan State for a long time, with D'Antonio, and that always was they were always really good against Notre Dame at that point as well. And then kind of just moving forward a little bit, I mean, you got Duke. You have Duke and you have Georgia Tech. Those should be wins. Clemson's obviously the big moneymaker game. Hopefully I'll be in attendance for that one this year. And then I actually think Louisville and USC are probably their 2. And happy that they have Louisville at home this year and had them on the road last year when Satterfield was a first-year guy over there, because I think he's going to really turn that program back around. So I'm happy that it's in November and it's at home. And then USC, I mean, say what you want about Clay Helton, but I think this year's USC team's actually going to surprise some people.
Before Mason jumps in on the schedule talk, I don't know if you guys noticed, we've got quite a few Miami fans that like to jump in here. They've watched both last week's and this week's. They love to throw out 41-8. And sure, the game happened. It was one of those games that John alludes to, but at the same time, Miami fans rubbing in losses to anybody seems to be a bit amusing after 6-7 and 7-6 the last 2 years. That was one game.
I think that's kind of like what Mason said about Michigan. I mean, we've had their blows against them too, so it's not one of those things where you have to sit there and recollect on it too much.
Yeah, I don't like to recollect on singular games. If people get on Notre Dame fans about, all you guys think about is the past. But if you're really focused on one game from 3 or 4 years ago, then, probably focus on your team going 500. But to echo what John was saying about the Navy games, yeah, getting it out of the way right away is good. I see you guys cracking up. Yeah, getting it out of the way is good. I'm not a fan of playing them. The chop blocks are something, and but playing in a cool environment, that Aviva Stadium's unreal. So I'm excited about that one.
Now I got a question for the panel here. So we already touched on what happened in Ann Arbor, and then we're touching on what happened at Miami. My question is, and this is one of the issues I struggle with when we talk about Notre Dame getting over the hump to the next level. Those are two particular instances where nobody could tell me the roster differences were that significant that even in those away environments, it justified that kind of score and performance from Notre Dame. Those are issues that are really bothersome to me because it isn't a talent difference when we lay those eggs. And so I always rack my brain trying to figure out what's gone wrong in our mentality or prep or whatever you want to call it, that you end up in those two particular huge games, a lot to gain, everybody watching you, and we don't seem to match the intensity of the opponent and lay a fat egg. I can't get over that.
I'm sorry, John. What were the two games?
The Michigan game this year.
Yeah.
One of them. And then
the Miami game
in 17 where we got our doors blown off. This nice gentleman reminded me of.
Yeah, because regardless of what Michigan fans would want to say and what Miami fans are saying here, the rest of the season showed us in 2017 that there was little difference, if any, between Notre Dame and Miami. That Miami was not better than Notre Dame. The 12 to 13 games played by the two teams showed us that over the course of the season. But on that given night, give them all credit is due that they blasted. It was not close. That was the Ian Book entry into the second quarter and the pick six right at the end of the half, correct? That really opened the door and blew it open. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just that issue is an overarching Brian Kelly one that it's really hard because you can't quantify that. Like this year, going into that Michigan game, the week before that game, Michigan was playing a night game at Penn State, one of the toughest places to play. Notre Dame had a bye week, a half a month to prep, borderline equal talent either way, and got their doors blown off. Why? Somebody tell me why. It isn't talent, so there's something else going on there that I can't wrap my mind around that drives me crazy. You got any ideas?
I'm too busy laughing at all the scores that are down below. It's just hilarious.
Oh, people love throwing scores.
Yeah, just your friendly reminder.
Yes, I'm the kind of nerd, college football nerd that remembers scores anyway, but these guys remind depending on the teams that are being talked about. Yeah, so that's, of course, the 2015 Fiesta Bowl or 2016, but the 2015 season.
I like to remember that bowl game as the Jalen Smith injury bowl game. It still bugs me to today.
Let's remember Nick Bosa was ejected out of that game as well, so you had kind of a tit for tat there.
I've never liked Taylor Decker since.
Oh, man. Before I forget, shout out to Paul Walsh. We miss you at Slap the Sign, man.
Nathan and Mason, what do you guys think when I ask that question? How is it possible with relatively equal talent, Notre Dame lays an egg, gets blown out in these games? Is it prep? Is it motivation? I don't understand it, and it's one of the big questions I have about this Brian Kelly thing and getting over the hump. I can't get over it.
Nathan, go ahead.
Yeah, the weird thing is I view both of those games so differently. I thought Miami, like the team, honestly, like just seemed scared. I don't know what it was. They just seemed. I don't even know if it was like a lack of preparation per se, but they just like seemed intimidated, for I guess lack of a better word. And I have no idea why. I mean, when you go to Notre Dame, you're always on the big stage, whether you're good or you're bad. You know, you're on NBC. You know, every home game, you play a bunch of really good teams every year. So that one was weird to me, and it. Almost sort of an outlier just because maybe they just didn't have the personalities correct on that team. I don't know. The Michigan one is the odd one because I mean outside, like I said, outside of Miami, because we know that I think Notre Dame had even more talent than Miami. It wasn't even like they were on par. So Notre Dame was better. The Michigan one, I mean, obviously I think the rain played a little bit of a factor, but then you also have the side of Michigan. It's like it obviously plays a factor for them as well.
It rained for both teams.
That's what I just said, but
I don't buy that at all.
That one seemed more like a lack of preparation to me from a coaching staff standpoint than the Miami one, I guess is what I'm really getting at. And I do put that on the coaching staff. So they're both anomalies in their own way, but they can't happen on a normal basis. And unfortunately, it seems to happen at least once a season.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to add. There isn't really an answer. It doesn't seem like there's a tangible answer to why Notre Dame gets blown out in big games like this, whether it's a mentality thing, playing with an edge. You have guys on the team that play with an edge. Literally, the definition of playing with an edge is Alohi Gilman, and he didn't do enough, clearly, against Michigan this past season. But he can't do it by himself. So you need more guys that are set and have the mindset to win the big games and want to play with the best and not play down to the competition, just barely getting a 7-point win against Pittsburgh, for example, or something like that, or going down to the wire against Virginia Tech. Those are teams you need to be blown out and then get into the level of Ohio State and Clemson, which I think we're still a ways away from.
So now that you bring that up, Mason, and I was going to ask this question anyway, because as John pointed out, Miami, Michigan, again, over the course of the season, I think it proved out that the teams were very comparable that blew out Notre Dame in those two instances. Who would be the programs right now that you still believe that if Notre Dame runs out there right now, or the 2019 edition, or what you project to be the 2020 caliber of this team, that you're still a bit uneasy to say, we don't think they're quite there? What is that collection of programs that you still need to reach for to get there? How many are there?
I find Notre Dame is anywhere in like the best 5 to 10. I think they're definitely on par with Georgia, Florida, Auburn, that kind of group. They're not in that top 3 or 4 group. Definitely not. It seems like there's a very clear tier of, you got Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson seem to be doing their own thing. You have the next tier, and I think Notre Dame falls into like the second half of that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think Notre Dame's a clear top 10 team from not only a recruiting standpoint, which obviously means a talent standpoint. I think they're a top 10 team from a coaching standpoint. I think they're a top 10 team from, record standpoint the last few years, if you just look at it. So, I mean, yeah, Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, and LSU are the 5 teams where I think I would definitively say they have more talent than Notre Dame. After that, I think there's a legitimate argument that Notre Dame's right there.
Yeah, I totally agree with them. And I think the tiering is rather obvious right now, just based on recruiting talent and results, playoff appearances, all that stuff. So I totally agree with those guys. They're in that tier of pretty darn good, very good, but they're kind of stuck at that tier. But when you're 33-6 over 3 years, I mean, that's pretty darn good football. Double-digit wins all those years. I mean, they're doing a lot of good things. The issue is when you're at Notre Dame, you're not playing for some divisional banner or anything. It's the big trophy or not much else. And so it's just kind of, I saw a comment saying, if you're mad about 10-2, you're in a pretty good spot. Not that many Notre Dame fans are still going to be happy with 10-2 losing against the 2 biggest games on the schedule anymore. And so we just have to see if we can find a way to get out of that. But right now they're firmly in that tier.
John, I know you mentioned some misgivings about scheduling Navy, but it is what it is. When you look at Notre Dame's approach to scheduling, of course, there's the 5-game ACC contract. They seem to be locked into the USC's USC Notre Dame. That's the best national rivalry. It's not even close with anything else. Stanford, again, we addressed this last week to a certain extent, or at some point in talking to you gentlemen on one of the videos about the what's that's become obviously a series. But in regards to the overall Notre Dame scheduling approach, are you guys happy with it, or would you change anything that they do in regards to scheduling?
I think the scheduling is just fine, but people like to point out different things like, oh, Stanford's weak, but you can't project Stanford being weak 6 years ago. Stanford was great 6 years ago. So it's difficult to project into the future when you're making a schedule for 2024 or 2025. What teams are going to be good then? Everybody thought USC, Stanford, et cetera, were all going to be great still, and they're not. So, that people want to talk about Notre Dame has a weak schedule, this and that, but they're scheduling home and aways with Ohio State, Alabama, Clemson, you name it. So I don't think it gets much better, other than, you have your ACC games. You can't project the ACC either. So I think they make it difficult on themselves being non-conference, but it is what it is. That's where Notre Dame's at.
There you go.
Yeah,
if you guys can
no,
see
there's no.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Sorry. No, I mean, I've never understood the people that trash on Notre Dame's schedule, because it's exactly what Mason's say. I mean, go look at just go online and type in Notre Dame future schedule and tell me in 2020 if you think 2025 is going to be a bad schedule. But then when it comes to 2025, if one of those teams seems to be a little bit more down than they typically are, then everybody wants to trash on Notre Dame for scheduling them. What happens when Alabama loses Nick Saban and maybe they're not the same team anymore? Is everybody going to say that Notre Dame scheduled Alabama and that's a bad game? I mean, to me, that it doesn't really make much sense. You kind of have to have it one way and not the other way. So, I mean, I think it's in like 2 years they play Ohio State and Clemson in the same year. I mean, how many teams are doing that from a non-conference perspective?
There are 75 Power 5 teams, something in that range, including the major independents. I would challenge anybody to take any schedule of any team in the country in 2020 and then list the teams from best to worst. So for Notre Dame, that would be Clemson, and that would be a judgment call between Wisconsin or, of course, USC's there. Anyway, just go through that exercise. Grab another team around the country. Grab a handful of teams, do the same thing, and see if you can find the depth of quality opponents on another schedule. Yes, they're out there, but there's not many. This is always, even in a down schedule year, which I think is what we had in the playoff year. Again, not Notre Dame's fault that Virginia Tech was down, USC was down, Florida State was down, somebody else on the schedule was down at that point. But you do that, and you're going to find consistently, even when those teams are down, you're still going to find consistently one of the 10 or 12 best schedules in the country.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, but that's the Notre Dame narrative. And the point I was going to make is the exact one you made. In the 2018 schedule, all they could do is schedule all these big traditional brand name power teams. It's not Notre Dame's fault that USC was really down. Virginia Tech was really down. Florida State was really down. USC. That's not Notre Dame's fault. All they can do is schedule them. And Notre Dame starts winning. And before you know it, they didn't schedule anybody. People act like these schedules are made 5 minutes before the game and you find the worst teams to put on them. So it's always a bad argument against Notre Dame. And, they're not afraid to schedule anybody. What does get interesting is the obligation now with the ACC portion of this schedule means there is a little less flexibility than there was before to be able to schedule some other teams. I know like Michigan State's interesting to me. Getting Purdue on the schedule would be interesting to me, given it's in Indiana and that history. So you have a little less flexibility now with the ACC obligation. But like Nathan said, look at 22 and 23. You got Clemson and Ohio State, both of those years. That's a tough slate. Anybody else got that? That's tough.
No.
I think the only thing,
go ahead,
the only
Nathan.
thing I disagree with Notre Dame in their scheduling, and it looks like John almost touched on it fully. I'm one of those Notre Dame fans that I don't really view Michigan as like a top 3 or 4 rival for them. I've always been USC, Purdue, and Michigan State, and then Navy as their top 4.
Above Michigan.
Yeah. It's nothing against Michigan. It's not like a shot at them. It's not a shot at Notre Dame. It's just they didn't even play Michigan consistently until like the 1970s or whatever it was. Purdue and Michigan State were on the schedule since God knows when. And when they took those teams off the schedule, not for good, but just like they're not playing them on even like on a semi-annual, I mean, like maybe like every other year, it bothered me to a certain extent. And so one of my big things was, if you really want to put Michigan State, Purdue on the same level for Notre Dame in terms of a rivalry standpoint, play one of those teams at least one time a year and just have them rotate. Play Michigan one year, Michigan State the next year, Purdue the next year, and then just go right back to it. That's the only thing I wish that they would continue to do. And unfortunately, it looks because of the ACC, 5 games a year. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that. And I think that's the only thing that bugs me right now about their schedule.
So again, we've got score reminders from NCIS Fanatic 21. We have to guess who he roots for.
We know.
So we got the 05 Fiesta Bowl. We've got a game in 1996 in South Bend, and we've got the 1995 matchup there.
Come on.
I don't think Notre Dame's beat Ohio State in my lifetime, so I don't know if I can say anything. If they have, I was too young.
Well, they didn't play before. They played in 95, 96, and now they've played in, those 2 Fiesta Bowl games. So they've played 4 times in the last, whatever that is, 95 to now 25 years. Before that, they hadn't played since like the 30s.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, Ohio State, I just don't really have like an opinion on Ohio State. We don't play them enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, you know where they're at now and the way they recruit. I mean, it's a machine up there. So, and then with the rivalries and what you were talking, for me, it's weird for me, and I don't know how this happened over time. Even with all this history and the way I am with Notre Dame history, what you said about Michigan is true. That's number 1 for me. My existential disdain for Michigan somehow has become number 1 to me. Maybe it's because I'm in the Chicago area and I'm not out on the West Coast. Then maybe it would be more USC for me. Maybe that geographic proximity has something to do with it. But for me, like in my lifetime, that Michigan game has everything. And the other reason I like that game is it's usually played very early in the year, and the numbers show between Notre Dame and Michigan, whoever wins that game usually goes on to have a double-digit plus win season, and whoever doesn't usually falls back that year. So I've really loved the pivot point of that early season Notre Dame-Michigan game dictating the era of each team for that year. I've loved it, and it's been historically very accurate. And so the buildup of those games I've always loved. This was an outlier, having this game be so late in the season. That's never happened before.
You led me into my next question, John, because Nathan touched on it, and we've talked the last 2 weeks in spots about everybody else hating Notre Dame, but who do Notre Dame fans hate? Well, Michigan, see, for me, despite what Nathan informed us about the history of the series being interrupted, of course, and then not being that lengthy in terms of college football history, Michigan, Notre Dame, that comes to mind to me as being the biggest rivalry. Well, Michigan, obviously, it's Ohio State, but Michigan, Notre Dame being just one of the games I have to watch, and them hating each other.
No, I realize I'm in the minority when it comes to that. I mean, I think like John said, I mean, growing up in Las Vegas, there's a lot of Southern Californian people out here, and there's a lot of USC people out here in terms of fandom. So I grew up with a lot of USC fans. I grew up going to USC Notre Dame games every other year in the Coliseum, almost to the point where I know my way around that area too well. But So, I mean, USC for me is by far number one. They're my most hated team. I also respect the hell out of them. I'm not one that hates a team and then doesn't respect them. I also, and I will admit, when Michigan's on the schedule, I gear up for it because I know it's going to be probably a good game, and I know that at least most of the fan base, or most of Michigan's fan base, most of Notre Dame's fan base, gears up for that game, and it's a big one for them. So, but me personally, like I get more excited when I find a Clemson or Ohio State on the schedule than I do when even Michigan's on the schedule. But I also realize, like I said, I realize it's a huge game. I honestly, it's more of just trying to get Michigan State and Purdue back on the schedule on a more consistent basis because I really do. That's how I grew up. I just grew up with those guys on the schedule, and I miss them.
At least as it pertains to the Mark Rogers TV Voice of College Football live chat room here, that 41-8 won't be erased until 2024, unfortunately, as I look at the future schedules.
Well, and that's my other problem with the Notre Dame Michigan game. We don't play again until 2033. So, I mean, I might be 6 feet under by the time we have a chance to get some retribution here. So I got to sit on that forever. And then just to touch back on the rivalry part, it's really interesting because Notre Dame's fan base is so spread out. It's not regional, like, hey, Nebraska, most people are from that area. So I think you end up with geographical areas of dislike for other teams. And I think some of it might even have to do with age. Like if you want to talk about, Miami back in the day and Florida State with Bobby Bowden in the early 90s, that's stuff that predates Nathan, and I was too small for it. But if you talk to people in my dad's generation, he's got some choice words for Jimmy Johnson and Bowden. Okay, so some of that is generational, some of it is geographical. And so I think it's really interesting. And if you talk to a bunch of Notre Dame people, they'll come up with different answers. The one you're not going to hear from me is Boston College. You're not going to hear that from me. I hate them, but they're not important enough to really make me matter or make a big deal about it. So you can have your little win in 93, your little kick that went through, tear up our field, ruin our locker room, go for it, and then live off it the rest of your life. But they are not good enough or important enough for me to care about. Although I do sound like I care, but that's just because it got brought up. That's just because it got brought up.
It sounds to me, John, as though you care because you're annoyed by the perceived care.
Yeah, exactly.
Of Boston College.
Exactly. Thank you.
So Dennis Wilson here, just truth be known, he's a Miami fan. So this enlightens me certainly because I thought there was actually a rotation or some kind of format to the schedule. I didn't realize that Notre Dame didn't schedule Miami because they definitely put our foot in Notre Dame's shame.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of comments that
not how it works.
Yeah, I didn't know that Notre Dame.
Fault Miami's not on the schedule.
Yeah, I don't know that the athletic department went to the ACC and demanded that Miami just please let's not play them. They're just too good for us.
I don't think was it 2012 where Notre Dame smashed on Miami in their en route to the college football or to the BCS national championship game. They don't like to talk about that game too much.
Now, you know what? You just brought that up. That's a really interesting angle. The interesting part about that game, Nathan, that was at Soldier Field in 2012. And there's an interesting connection there because if you look at the schedule we just went over for this next year, I think the only true away game Notre Dame plays is at the Coliseum. Every other one of those games is at a neutral site or a pro field, which I think is really interesting. And I just think that's kind of weird. Notre Dame ends up in a lot of these Jerry World and Fenway Park and all over the place. I'm pretty sure that's their only true road venue is at the Coliseum.
Do you guys have any opinion on Paul Walsh's comment here that Brian Kelly has an issue trying to motivate his team?
Absolutely, I do. I totally agree with that because it's the only answer I could come up with to why they don't perform against teams they have equal or better talent than sometimes. That has to be a motivational issue. What else could it be?
Paul's actually a good buddy of mine. He used to write for Slap the Sign, but this is another thing I think I'm in the minority in, and I can speak to it a little bit just from coaching experience myself and different things like that. I think one of the most overrated things in sports is coaching motivation. And I know a lot of coaches that are probably listening to this are probably pissed off because they think that their word means so much. I've been in dugouts galore for college baseball, and I can tell you, if you can't motivate yourself, then I don't understand what you're doing there. So to me, I think that Kelly being like an elite motivator per se shouldn't be the reason Notre Dame goes 12-0 versus 10-2. That's just my personal opinion. I could completely be wrong on that because I don't think anybody's really wrong on that. I think it's a matter of an opinion. But for me personally, I don't think coaching has that much of an effect in terms of a motivation process. I think the guys motivate themselves. They patrol themselves. When they're on the road, for example, like even though the coaches are there and they're cognizant of what they might be doing, they're still picking when they go to bed and when they eat, when they do different things. So personally, I don't think that motivation is a big factor.
Okay, let me show the other side of it. So I don't. When you get in these games like Michigan, where there's not this huge talent disparity and you get blown out and don't look like you're ready to play, that is what invites the question of motivation, because we already established those rosters have relative talent that are pretty close. So then when you start adding up these eggs and it's not talent, then it has to be something else, whether it's prep or motivation. Maybe it's the player leadership. I don't know what it is. But the only reason we're asking that question is because of these reoccurring issues. Don't lay these eggs against equal talent. I won't ask the question. But when you do, I think it's a fair question. And the one thing, I always say this, when you talk about this motivation, sometimes Brian Kelly does this thing where it's like, hey, it's Michigan on the road in the big house, but we're going to punch in, clock in, do our job, go to work. College football is about emotion. There's nothing wrong with building up certain games to mean a little more. And that's one little area that I question, is this punch in, punch out, do our job. The other locker room saying, we're going to kick the crap out of these guys. We hate them. Not to a level that's out of control, but that extra gear that some of these teams seem to have when they play us that we don't match. So that's my struggle. And Nathan, you're a Notre Dame guy. You're talking about what, you don't care about the win one for the Gipper with the motivation, and Lou Holt saved Jimmy Johnson for me and against Miami in '88. Notre Dame's a unique job. It's hard to win there. Sometimes Notre Dame isn't going to have that equal talent to Miami in '88 or Florida State. Sometimes that little extra motivation is what it takes. And I think it's unique, it's not unique to Notre Dame, but I think it's a bigger factor at Notre Dame because there are certain challenges there. Every once in a while, you need that coach to light that fire or know what button to press. And I'm still really waiting to see it here.
I'm going to pick up the fight against James Scott here. So James responds and comments to this channel on a regular basis, and he is a great encouragement to me and pumps up the channel and promotes the channel. So James knows that. James knows I love him, but at the same time, this comment here. So I'm going to fight a losing battle. I understand it. The score was 41-8. I get it that night, but I'm looking at Notre Dame's schedule because I just remember thinking, man, I did not see this coming, and still remembering looking back, because I'm reminded by Miami fans, 41-8, 41-8, 41-8, all the time. I'm looking back on that season, just thinking, okay, all credit due to Miami. They kicked their rear ends, but man, that was an aberration. These are very, very like-seeded and talented teams, and James just doesn't agree with me. But man, this Notre Dame team in 2017, okay, they lost by 1 point to a team that came within an overtime Tua Tagovailoa throw of winning the national championship. They were the best team in the country, or that close to being the best team in the country. Notre Dame lost to them by 1 point. They beat a Michigan State team by 20 points, by 3 scores, that went 10-3 in the Big Ten, maybe the best division in the country. They beat a North Carolina team 33-10 that Miami struggled to beat by 1 score, 5 points. Notre Dame beat them by 23, 33-10. They beat a USC team that won the Pac-12 championship, went to the Cotton Bowl. They beat them by 35 points, 5 touchdowns, a USC team that had NFL receivers all over the place, Sam Darnold playing quarterback, beat them by 5 touchdowns. The next week, they beat a really good North Carolina State team that finished in the top 25. They beat them by 3 touchdowns. They beat LSU, and I know this isn't 2019 LSU, but this is still top 5 NFL talent. I'm not saying they're a top 5 team, but this is like a top 5 NFL talent team, LSU. They beat them, obviously, on the late throw by Ian Book in the last minute of play, 21-17 in the bowl game in Orlando. This team played a lot of good football that year.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because that's not one of those years that people bring up as a bad schedule year.
Oh, my word. That's a tough schedule.
I mean, I think too many people like to just look at a score of a game and just assume that the team that blew someone out or won the game was automatically a more talented, better squad. I mean, people lose team. I mean, was Purdue better than Ohio State, 2 years ago? No, they weren't, but they blew them out. I mean, it happens. And I mean, it's not an excuse for losing 41-8. It just doesn't necessarily mean that a team's better than another team simply because they hammer them one night. It goes back to sort of what you said earlier, Mark, that I think last year if you put Notre Dame and Michigan on the same field, 9 out of 10 times Notre Dame maybe comes out with that win. So.
But see that this is where it's all connected, because we're bringing up all these points. The overarching back for everybody else that isn't in the Notre Dame camp is, yeah, but what about that one big game on that one moment? You could say 8 out of 9 or 9 out of 10 times Notre Dame would win. Well, guess what? The one I saw on TV that ruined my entire fall was the 1 out of 10, right? And I did my show last week. I was looking at TV numbers, and I was looking at the TV ratings for the Notre Dame games. I had a guest on who broke this all down. And what you see is, obviously, those bigger matchups are doing those huge numbers. And a lot of people don't watch Notre Dame other than when it's that primetime game or against their team. Then you tune in, and then you see Notre Dame lay an egg, and then it's like, well, who cares who else they beat? Look at them now. They're on the big stage. Everybody's watching them, and they laid an egg. And so some of this is self-inflicted by Notre Dame. And I keep going back to it. You got to win one of these games. The narrative isn't going to change until they do it. Not get close, not win all the other ones. You got to get over that hump and win one of those games.
Absolutely. There you go. We're talking Notre Dame football. We hope to do it each and every week with the likes of John Kennedy from Always Irish and Nathan Urbach from Slap the Sign. Also, our thanks go out to Mason Plummer, who joined us for the first 45 minutes or so. Please leave your comments, your questions throughout the week, and I can collect those for these guys when we get together. Hopefully, we'll see what our schedules look like, but it looks like Monday night may be the night. All right. Appreciate you guys stopping by, talking some Notre Dame football. And hope to do it soon.
Fantastic.
Thanks, Mark.
All right, everyone on the line. We will be back possibly with Oregon, but we had a mix-up of schedules, so we'll see what happens with that tonight. But you know me, we'll be back talking college football each and every day. So keep it locked in here. Please like, comment, share the videos, and subscribe.